Welcome to the Integrated Marketing and Communications Department. This is part of our Future Forward series. It's great to see so many of you here. I'm sure more will be coming in from the cold. People are a little frozen today, so we'll give them a little bit of time. We also have a bunch of people online, so hello everybody online. We are really excited to see students here because the events that the department holds are curated exactly for you. So NYU has a bunch of events, right? Hundreds of events. You'd be going to events every single day. The ones from the department, our Future Forward series, our skill build, and our celebratory events are curated particularly for integrated marketing and public relations and strategic communication students. So we want to hear from you too. So we're going to be asking you after this in a survey to tell you what you thought of this today. So enjoy this. We are really thrilled to have David here to talk with us about building brands, particularly at a time of AI. We also have our host today is Milos, and Milos, many of you may know as a full-time faculty member here, who is one of our most fabulous faculty members. So we're great to have him to dig into and David and question him today. But before we start, I just want to tell you a few messages from the department that Marissa's going to help with. We have two really exciting global field intensive opportunities coming up. They're called GFI. Do you know what they are? They're special opportunities for you folks to travel and learn and get credits. So actually Milos runs the one to Paris and the Cannes Festival of Creativity. And we have a brand new one coming up this summer to Shanghai. So as you can see, the deadlines are coming up. So if you or one of your friends are thinking about applying for these great opportunities, please do so as soon as you can. They're credit-bearing opportunities, they're special topics, so you go and you learn, and they're life-changing, network-building, blow your mind, really fascinating opportunities. So I promise you that it will be exciting. You have to apply for that because they're in demand. The next thing I want to remind you of is that we do these again all the time. These curated events are for you. So pay attention to when you see Future Forward Speakers series. You folks are getting a great degree, but it's here where you build your network with each other and with the folks that we bring in all the time to speak with you. So put February 5 on your calendar when we have Kate O'Neill coming in to talk about tech decisions and how that impacts our decisions in marketing, integrated marketing, and also public relations. Finally, connect with us. If you're not connected, if you're not following us on LinkedIn and Instagram, please do so. That's where you'll hear more about events. That's where we can celebrate. You come up and get your picture with David after and get your selfie and then promote the fact that you got your selfie. We also will be taking a picture, the department, to celebrate the fact that we had great Future Forward Speaker Series opportunity. So make sure you're connected in LinkedIn with us. And without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Milos, who will tell you a little bit more about David, and who will then dive into his presentation. So thank you for being with us today. Enjoy.
Well, thank you all for being here. And first, I would like to thank our guests, David Roth and Eric Berskild. David Roth and Eric have been big supporters of our program for the past several years. And some of you might have been in some of my classes where we've utilized the opportunities that they gave us quite extensively, but to give a bit of a background of the stuff that they're actually doing. So David is part of WPP, and most of you know it is the largest marketing agency. And within WPP, there is an organization called BAV, which is the largest branding analytics platform in the world. In many ways, you can actually call it the largest branding database that spans over 30 years now of data. And probably David will share, I know it was in billions of data points. I think last time it was like 18 billion data points or something along those lines.
It keeps growing.
It is growing. It's by far the largest data set when it comes to what we know about brands. And our students were the only people outside of WPP that had access to that database to play with it and to play with the platform that they have actually developed in the past few years, which allowed the seamless way to create visualizations and analytics regarding different brands. Today, what we're going to talk about is what is on everybody's mind, and that is AI. We know that AI is now the topic of the day, but I personally believe it is going to be the topic not only of today, but for a long future. And it has a huge impact on marketing careers. It has a huge impact on branding. On one end, for you guys, it has an impact because creative professionals were interestingly some of the first that were affected by AI, even though originally we believed the simpler jobs would be more affected. Connected with that, WPP started a range of initiatives in order to start integrating AI and utilizing and benefiting from AI to also foster the growth of their own employees, but to create value for their customers. So I'm not going to say more. I know David has an amazing presentation, and please, let's give first a round of applause for our guests for being here with us. Thank you all.
All right, well, thank you very much indeed. It's a pleasure and an honor to be with you today. I've got loads of things to cover, so hopefully we can get through it all in there, and we'll do our best. If you've got any questions, both online and in the room, don't wait till the end. Just put your hand up and we'll deal with them as and when. So I think it's a bit of an understatement now, and I know that every generation thinks that things are more different, things are moving faster than they were in previous generations. But I think what we've seen probably over the last 20 years has been a phenomenal rate of change that has impacted all of us as individuals, that's impacted us all as clearly as consumers. And we are all trying to, businesses, societies, governments, we're all trying to navigate our way through it in some sort of extraordinary times. And I suppose the biggest shock to the system, when I talk about the system, I mean the business ecosystem, looking forward at what society is going to be like, looking forward to what employment is going to be like going forward. The biggest shock to that system has been AI. Now, I think we could all be forgiven for thinking that AI is something that's unbelievably new, that has just sort of arrived from nowhere and starts to make a dramatic impact in the way in which business operates and the way, more parochial, I suppose, the way marketing and communications and strategy is going to be using AI tools in order to do things in a different way, maybe a more efficient way, certainly a faster way. But I suppose AI really isn't particularly new, but there are, I suppose, three forces that suddenly have made AI less science fiction and more probable and doable. So let's take a quick sort of look back in time, probably about 2,500 years, where I suppose the most dramatic impact happened in my sort of belief in terms of the dramatic changes that it had in business to what AI is going to have today. And this actually was when the abacus was invented. And the abacus fundamentally changed how retailing was done, fundamentally changed how business was done, calculations could be made, people could, extract all sorts of value in a trading relationship where beforehand that was exceptionally difficult. And I had the privilege of writing a book which was called The History of Retail in 100 Objects. And it looked at the 100 objects since we were all in caves to sort of today that had a profound impact on the way in which retail has developed. And I'm an ex-retailer. I spent 15 years working for, I suppose, what would be classed as the equivalent of Home Depot across Europe and Asia, and the privilege of running that business. It made me smile when you showed the retail tour of Shanghai, because it must be more years than I care to remember. It must be 20 years ago that I actually took with a team of people B&Q from the UK, and we opened up stores in China. First two stores were in Shanghai, and I lived there for some time, so that was very nostalgic. So you can see those pictures and how they absolutely recognise where two of those shops were. Now, here's a slight dilemma when I was sort of deciding, because we when you start a project in that sort of way, I can tell you, for those of you who've never been before, there are two fantastic times. The first is when you think of the idea and you think of the title, and the second is when you see the first book coming up printed. The bit in the middle is horrendous, right? Absolutely horrible. But you just have to persevere. So I recommend just persevere and get through it. But we sort of thought, actually, what we should do is structure it in where in the journey of mankind those objects had their defining sort of place. And there was a bit of a dilemma, actually, as to where to put AI, because naturally you would have thought AI is right at the end of that. But actually, AI is, I mean, it has its origins in the algorithm. And of course, the algorithm we put in the early training, they're sort of 820 AD, because that's when an amazing mathematician developed and created the whole concept of what the algorithm was all about. So why does it take all that time for the algorithm suddenly to have such a dramatic impact in our lives? And I would say there's three fundamental forces. And those forces are really interesting because we've seen them in play in previous innovation cycles. The first is Moore's law, right? So for those of you who know anything about silicon chips, Gordon Moore, who was, I suppose, the grandfather of the silicon chip, he established Intel, and he had a myth, well, not so mythical law, a law that I think still until this day sort of stands water, which is the relationship between how every 2.5 years the chip processing speed has the ability to increase by 4.5 times. Now, I had an interesting conversation with some engineers at Intel a couple of years ago, and I said, surely you've come to the end of Moore's law. And they are absolutely convinced that they absolutely haven't. There's a long way to go to optimize the chip form. So that's one thing. The second thing is just the fact that, and of course the chips have a big impact on this, the cost of computing has been going down dramatically. So the cost has been going down, the power of the chips is going up. And we've sort of discovered this whole notion of sort of cloud infrastructure. That's a little bit of a misnomer, because nothing really is in the cloud. It's all on the ground. It's a massive server farms that are being built faster than anything at the moment. But those three things together have suddenly made the algorithm and the ability to use that compute power to be able to do things at speed and at scale. And that really was the thing that we've seen really change over the last couple of years, and why the algorithm has suddenly come of age, or come of age again. Now, in every I suppose change in, and it's easier to look at it in technology terms, because over a relative period of time, we've seen a lot of big sort of changes in the way in which technology works. It's very interesting from a marketing perspective and a brand perspective to look at the players who are really big at stage one, and then you get a a dramatic shift in the technology, you know, and are those players still the players that manage to remain in leadership positions? And it's an interesting intellectual debate, and Craig Christensen wrote a fantastic book called The Innovator's Dilemma. It must be about 50 years ago. It's definitely worth a reread of The Innovator's Dilemma. And he looked at all the changes in not just technology, but changes in and which of the companies managed to make that leap to be not only big in their market, but as change came, and they became very big as well. And he proved how difficult it was for very large companies to be able to make that change. And my analogy would be this: it's a bit like, you own, all the cinemas, in America, and then somebody comes to you one day and they put on the table a television. They say, "We've invented this thing called a television. Everyone's going to be watching these things at home. Would you like to invest in it?" And you say, "Well, it's a fantastic idea, but if I invest in that television and it works, nobody's going to be coming to my cinemas. So I don't really want to do that. It's going to, fundamentally destroy my business." Of course, what happens is somebody else invests in television, and your business gets destroyed anyway. So that's sort of the innovator's dilemma. And I think what's really interesting about what we're seeing in AI at the moment is, really enter left stage OpenAI. Who in this room have ever heard of OpenAI more than 2.5 years ago? It was only sort of, I say only, I think that's the majority of it. But it was, it was the academic community, who knew a little bit about it, but not too much. But us as consumers have never ever heard of it, nor have we any comprehension of what it was able to be. And I think what we are going to see is that, again, when you look at the way which markets move, you can sort of analyze them by shape. There's a sort of a bar sort of type of market movement, sort of quite steep, going up, going down, longer in the middle. I think we're going to see with AI, and especially the way in which it's being developed, this is an amazing hockey stick. I'm going to talk about some examples in the retail area about why I think it's going to happen. It's going to be slow and slow and slow and slow, and suddenly we're really going to start to see what the impact is. I'm going to show you just some of the issues that we're grappling with in terms of some of those issues as well. So you may know this, you may not, but I thought it's worthwhile just coming back. ChatGPT, 5 days after it launched, 1 million users, 100 million users in just 2 months. I mean, it's quite extraordinary. We thought that Instagram and Spotify and Dropbox and Twitter were an amazing adoption of a new technology by consumers. But this is astonishing, especially as, in a sense, it was never really developed as a consumer-facing platform. It was an experimental platform, and I think credit to them, they decided to open it up to everybody, not just the academic community. We'll talk about more about that. So let's take a look at ChatGPT itself as a brand, because I think that's really interesting. Here we have something that's fundamentally changing the rules of the game. Not from usual subject. It doesn't come from Google. It didn't come from Apple. It didn't come from Microsoft. It came from a company that no one had ever heard of. Suddenly, we are all talking about it. And we're going to do that through the lens of the WPP study. Now, as luck would have it, I'd like to say that we don't have to be bad, but in reality, maybe somebody used to work with me, which is saying it's much better to be lucky than good. We were very lucky. We put ChatGPT to the moment we heard a little bit about it, just a little bit before it was launched on the circuit. We had a little bit of people, with a large company. They were interested in our views on it from a doesn't have any strange even to think that they were asking if they have any marketing intentions. So we put it on our study immediately. Now, as Milos said, BAV is by far the world's largest brand. I have to say, I'm privileged to lead it for WPP, but it certainly wasn't my venture. This game for this 31 years, and it's actually it's like that. So you're going to Shanghai, and maybe I'll show Milos the data. Show it. Because we started going for 31 years, for whatever reason, I have no idea. In the first study, a lot of Chinese brands were studied. So we actually had Chinese brand data, not every year, but years. And actually, we just done an analysis for published in March, April time, looking at the journey that Chinese brands have taken over those 30 years in comparison to the journey of foreign brands inside China. It's absolutely fascinating just to see the big changes in that as well. But having that longevity in time allows you to take quite a crude helicopter view of the way in which brands work. Of course, we all know that you don't create a brand in a day. It takes time and it takes brand engineering, although what I'm going to show you from ChatGPT might dispel that myth for all of us. So 16 billion individual data points, we've got 63,000 brands, about 75 constant metrics over that period of time, and about now 3 million in respondents in 53 countries. Eric is the person who's responsible for creating the technology that underlines how all this is used as a platform, and trying to help everybody make sense of all those sort of 16 plus billion individual data points in analysis. Now, a couple of things to put in place to help you understand, I suppose, the concept of actually how do you track and understand how brands, of course, we all know the wonderful things about a brand. It can have a lot of value, but also phenomenally intangible, because the only place the brand physically exists is in the minds of you. And it's quite a difficult thing to extract that very sort of emotional, rational sort of relationship, and actually how you do that. Now, there's sort of two schools of thought, and BAV is very much on the school of thought that brands don't exist just within their category. Brands exist in the context of the culture of a country, the culture of a region, the culture of the world. So it's very important when you're asking consumers about their views of brands, not to sort of define it as I want to have a look at how you do this brand in the context of a category, but I want to get you to explain to me in the context of the other brands that you interact with in society. And that then allows you to be able to very quickly compare one brand to another brand. And also very important, because I think one of the things that, hopefully you'll be, and one day, in fact, the brand managers of some of the most amazing brands right around the world. And I have to say, you get very sort of blinkered, and you see everything through the lens of the category that you're operating in. Health and beauty category, you want to category. And consumers don't do that. And as we've seen, those types of categories are also breaking down as well. I mean, is Apple a music brand? Is it a technology brand? Is it a watch manufacturer? So the divisions of those hard sort of categories are breaking down as well. So within BAV, we can look at two things. We can look at across the category, and we can look at cultural competitors.
Yeah, sorry, David. One very applied question, and for NYU, we clearly follow our category brands, but we don't necessarily know what our cultural competitors would be. What would you say? What could be a cultural competitor to any or like any major university of our profile that is not another university?
Yes, well, I would say a museum. Yeah, I would say maybe a great orchestra. Yeah,
Okay, so things that provide this kind of a
yeah, maybe,
deeper social value to.
yeah, maybe, you know, Davos. Yeah,
Okay.
that's why doing it this way actually starts to make you really think, which, you know, where do we sit in this ecosystem? And it also makes you start to think about actually what are the defenses and offensive strategies that you need to start to deploy to be able to do it. Because let's take the Davos example. If you actually say, well, actually, you know, our competitive set is other educational institutions in and around the New York area. That's, you know, that's pretty well, they're very good, so quite so limited. But, you know, that's just, you know, that's a defining set. If you actually said, actually, we, you know, we see ourselves competing with Davos, you know, that, you know, it's a whole different sort of strategy. It's about forward thinking, it's about economic business, it's about, you know, global thinking, global strategy, you know, that's what you want to teach, etc. So I think it's very instructive to be able to do that. Because I think it stops you becoming very myopic. Because your competitors, well, some of your competitors won't be very myopic. And they'll start to realize actually they can come after you. So it's really important to be able to do that. Just very quickly, so you understand some of the principles, and then I'll show you where ChatGPT now exists in terms of how it's seen as a brand. I suppose we have two sort of strands: brand strength and brand stature. You've got to look at both those two, because combined they tell a really interesting story. So brand stature is about esteem and knowledge, and that really tells you how you're doing today. Right now, one of the really cruel things about the street and the city is, to be honest, they don't really care about how you perform today. What they really care about is how you're going to perform tomorrow. Right? Now, a company's share price is not about its historical performance. It's about the analyst's perception and views and understanding of how well that company is going to be in the future. If the share price goes up, people think you know, you're going to do well tomorrow. If the share price goes down, people will do really badly. And the drivers of that is about being differentiated and being relevant. When you put those two things together, and if you can be good on all of those dimensions, then you have a very, very strong and a very powerful brand, because brand stature is about current operating value, and brand strength is about your future brand value. Now, you can then take that and apply it and do some typical sort of statistical and mathematical analysis tricks around that. You're all familiar with Boston style matrices, and of course, the place on every Boston matrix you want to be is that top sort of right-hand side. So that's where you have huge amounts of brand stature, so people know you and they view you highly, but also you've got a lot of differentiation and relevance. And brands, like people, move around that type of framework in very different ways. Right? So there is no common pattern every single brand works through, except it's very unlikely, if you're a leadership brand, you haven't sort of started as a momentum brand and moved over to leadership. There are many, many examples of brands that were really, really strong. I'm sure you can think of them. Who were an absolute dominant force from a brand perspective, but actually become amazingly fatigued. Now, of course, from a brand management perspective, again, if you're brand managers and you're thinking about it, okay, so I'm managing a portfolio of brands, and we all have exactly the same issue when you're managing a portfolio of brands. I have a lot of brands, but I have limited resource. I have a limited human resource or limited capital to invest, etc. That's not to say you might actually not be happy with a brand that's there, because a brand that's there, you're probably making an amazing amount of money. You know, it's sort of a bit of a cash cow. Yeah, and you might say, I can live with that for 10, 15 years because I will extract all the cash out of that, I won't invest it, and I will create other brands that will become momentum and then leadership, and then what we'll do when the brand gets really fatigued, we'll sell it to a venture capital company, they can resurrect it and make a lot of money, and we won't worry too much about that, we've already extracted most of our value from that. So, a couple of examples, some of these brands you've probably never heard of. I don't know if you've heard of anybody ever heard of Blockbuster? Sad, okay. Show that old wheel. The Blockbuster, I mean, they, in a very different world, if you wanted to watch a video, you had to go to a Blockbuster store and you had to borrow a VHS cassette from it. And you paid them for the privilege of doing that and then returned it a few days later. They owned, you know, they were up here. And then this sort of young upstart, Netflix, appeared on the scene. And I know from people at Blockbuster, they thought this was an irrelevance to them. Yeah. It will never work, never be interested in it. And then Netflix suddenly started to think of themselves not as a exchange of DVDs, but actually we can start actually making content. We can start competing with that, you know, with the big production houses, the Sony's of this world. And you can see now the position that Netflix is and where Blockbuster is. Now, the same applies to Nokia and Apple. When I was in China all those years ago, I mean, Nokia owned the market. You were Nokia owned in China, you were nothing. And then, of course, Apple comes along. And in fact, I still remember this very, very vividly. And I'm sure there'll be certain points in your career that you'll never forget. And it's usually meetings that go really, really bad. Okay, so nothing ever goes 100% brilliant. I always planned anything like gosh, that was really awful. I was doing a piece of consultancy for the main board of Nokia, and we've gone through the various players, and the question that was exercising their mind was who from the technology space was going to own the living room. You know, was it going to be Sony? Was it going to be sort of this new upstart, sort of Microsoft? Was it going to be Intel, etc.? There was a lot of debate about all this, and that was a project that they engaged us to do. You know, what was Nokia's position going to be in your living rooms? And this was the final presentation with the main board, and I was doing my best, and one of the main board directors stopped me, which is never a good sign after a presentation. And he says to me, the problem with people like you, and he's shaking his thing out of this is not good. The problem with people like you is you don't realise how difficult it is to make a mobile phone. And nobody from outside the mobile phone industry has the capacity, the capability, and the technology to be able to do it. Period. Now, maybe 18 months, 2 years later, Apple comes on the scene and takes a completely different perspective actually of what a mobile phone is. Takes a completely different perspective and those days, they different operating model, but they were very happy that subcontractors didn't need to own it. Nokia was besotted by the fact that they owned every single piece of that supply chain, and it was very complicated because phones change every 6 months. It's writing normally complex ways of production and distribution and retail. But if you get yourself in that mindset of there isn't anybody else who can possibly do what you're doing, then as you can see, disaster is before you. Now, there's another really interesting thing about using this construct as a framework. Is it can actually be a predictor of growth. So if you're in this type of a category, we know that because of all that normative data, all of that 31 years of data, we start to do some really interesting mathematics there. And we know that brands that sit in this territory, they grow 11% on usage and 9% on top revenues the following year. So So here's another piece of advice to you, because I bear the scars of this as a, not just somebody who spent a lot of time in the advertising industry, but also somebody who's a marketing director. When you're sitting around a boardroom table at budget times, and it's every man and woman for himself in those situations, because there's only a certain amount of money to go around. So if you get it, somebody else around the table, maybe the partner doesn't get it, right? And it's very lonely being marketing director, because all the others are saying, well, if we invest in this new HR system, we're going to get a 5% reduction in turnover, and that's worth X amount to us, right? And the supply chain director said, well, I'm going to put 2 new distribution sectors in. That's going to, reduce our distribution cost by 0.5%, and that means a turnover investment of X. And I say, I want to do a little bit more advertising, because we want to increase our share of voice, but I can't really tell you what the return on that investment is going to be. But trust me, it's going to be great. So it's a difficult, a tough situation. But if you can start to quantify the likelihood of things happening depending on where you are in those various different categories, it's amazing how. Although of course I did learn quite quickly that the fact that the supply chain director said we're getting manufacturing supply chain costs will never really materialise. So it's all a little bit. Okay, so coming back to where we started. So ChatGPT, no one's ever heard of it at day one. This is where it starts. It's astonishing, right? It is highly differentiated and highly relevant. Its only issue, in a sense, is it's not that well known. I mean, not that well known in the context of brands like Apple and what have you. And then, we also looked at it in lots of places around the world, and it's astonishing that a brand can appear from absolutely nowhere and, almost right across the world, and in some places actually, even nudged into that leadership category. That is phenomenal. For any brand. Now, I suppose this is where
one thing recently I was reading a study which is kind of surprising, that the highest penetration of all markets it actually has in India, and US is fairly lagging behind some of the other countries. You would expect, because it's an American company, that it would have the highest penetration here, but in India something like 40. This was a few months ago, 43% of people were actually using ChatGPT on a weekly basis. While in US, the number was maybe 17%.
That's interesting, because I could corroborate it with another data source. So I can't remember, we probably won't get time to look at it. But we do another study that also looks at countries as brands. There's a lot of reasons why you want to do that. Mainly to better understand what are the core drivers of GDP growth in the country. And, countries need to be managed like brands need to be managed. Countries have resources to deploy and strategies to deploy that can either accelerate the way in which that country is seen in other parts of the world, or decelerate that way. So last year, for the first time, we had a question on the best countries study, which was, do you think that the advantages of AI outweigh the disadvantages? And what was quite interesting is, in a lot of, and I don't mean this in a pejorative way, but in a lot of the developing markets, in the class we do it, and that they have a much higher percentage of people say that the advantages outweigh the disadvantages. And in America and the UK and parts of Europe, the reverse is true. So, you can start to put a picture, and I think it's about I think a lot of people in India, etc., understanding that it can be an accelerant as opposed to it's an amazing threat. Now, of course, awareness is one thing. As we've seen from that paragraph, it's not just about awareness, it's about other things, but also brand personality and how it's seen is another. And that's a very important element to be tracking as well, because that gives you as a marketeer an understanding of which levers that you can pull in order to start the marketing really has two sort of things it can do. It can accelerate things, it can create distance with it. So Yeah, so where is ChatGPT at the moment? Very weak. Yeah, it's very weak on trust. It's weak on convenience, and I think that's more when some people find it quite difficult to work out how to use it, where to get it from. You know, it's not surprisingly very strong on contemporary. It's really strong in innovation, not that many brands of innovation. It has relatively poor status. So as a brand, you know, I'd love to get my hands on ChatGPT as a brand. You know, there is so much opportunity to really mold it into something that, you know, has the capacity to really challenge the status quo. And this is looking at sort of other elements of brand imagery. So
Originality is the lowest.
yeah. That's it. Okay, so let's just sum up that and move on to something else. Hopefully, we'll have time to connect some of these dots together. So, the strongest brand equity position in the first year of a brand's existence that we've ever seen. So, quite extraordinary. Globally strong in year one in all markets, which is also extraordinary. That's all about best countries. So, the study that we do in conjunction with, you probably never know Howard University, Water Business School. And I suppose, a bit like AI, country branding is not new. I mean, the Romans were phenomenal. A country brand is all you need to see was that, and we knew exactly what was going to happen to as the Romans played with it. It might have taken them about 6 or 7 years to get to it, but once they've got to the they promise, but sort of measuring a brand is, and these are all the brands that we measured last year, and yeah, so 67% of people believe overall that AI outweighs the benefits and the threats. When you look at just the subset of business leaders, that goes up. Okay, now. The wonderful thing of something new coming into a marketplace is that, you know, it has its own ecosystem of disruptors. So let's have a little look at some of the things that are currently now being disrupted by this newcomer, and, you know, sort of major changes in sort of the tectonic plates of the way in which we traditionally do things, the way in which we apply techniques to marketing, and the way in which consumers now go about doing their job. This was something that Accenture did, which looked at which were the industries that had the highest or the lowest sort of level for automation, and of course, you know, obviously AI is this biggest sort of area in all of those. The bottom line for all of that is there isn't sort of an industry that hasn't got a lot of room to adopt AI in one form or another, and for it to be absolutely transformative within that industry. I think for the very first time since sort of Google really established itself, you know, Google as a verb sort of coming and attack them. Eric and I were talking to a company called SimilarWeb that track all of the web traffic and phone traffic or whatever around the world. A piece of work with them, looking at how quickly the likes of ChatGPT are being used in order, you know, to do things that you would have gone to do. So a whole concept of actually what is a search engine is, I think, going to be very interesting. Now, we may well find, I mean, I'm not trying to be nasty about Google because they're one of our biggest clients. Anyone's listening to us. But we also know how the game is played, which is, you know, it's a pay to play sort of scenario. You know, as a marketeer, we buy search words on Google, search and whatever, and we want to optimize, you know, our brand or our search or whatever to get the front page, because I don't know about you, I can't remember the last time I only went to page 2 or even later page 3. So we want to make sure it's as high as we possibly can. So, you know, the search engine, who's the search engine working on behalf? Well, it's sort of working on behalf of me as the consumer, but in reality, sort of working on behalf of Google and Microsoft. Interesting, I think, with the chat bot engines. Actually, who are they actually going to be working on behalf of? And I think, yeah, it puts much more of the power back to you as the individual. Because at the moment, they don't have a great vested interest. Now, with some of the search engine stuff, they didn't have a great Alta Vista, really good example for developed by Compound. They never quite understood the commerciality of it, so they never developed this. It was a better technology, I think, but they never developed it faster than because they never understood how to make it commercial. But that sort of operated. So, I mean, you know, AI is really out for search, not in we're going to destroy the search industry. It's the fact that now the volume of the way people are using search is really interesting. And then I think the other thing that this is going to impact is pricing models, especially in the marketing arena and business. You know, all the sort of areas that you probably are interested in going into, marketing, business consulting, some of maybe the big advisory firms where the currency is time. So a project's going to take this amount of time, this amount of months to do, it's going to take this amount of analysts to do, it's a lot of people, a lot of time, you know, then we put in, you know, the overhead and then the margin. So, you know, you establish what the price is going to be. And if you're a fantastic brand like McKinsey, you can have a much larger margin than if you're good, but not seen as good as maybe BCG, but brand, same sort of margin and price. But actually, this is going to turn that model, I think, very much on its head, which is rather than time, there's so much of what's going to be done is going to be, you know, type it in and there it appears in front of your eyes. So it's going to move from time to value-based price. Now, let's come back to where we started. So why do you want to bother to build a really strong brand in an AI age? Here's one of the reasons, because you are going to have to be able to create an amazing amount of value. The thing that we know about investing in brands is that brands do create value because they give you permission to be able to command a price. Now, the same applies to consumer brands as it does to, you know, to B2B brands. But you know, there's a lot of emotion in, you know, which legal firm you use as a company, which auditors you use. It's not a completely functional decision. You know, it's like, well, if I employ this legal firm, it says quite a lot about who I am as a company. We use this type of auditor, it says to the market that we're big, we're sophisticated, etc. We can really trust us, etc., etc. So the more things move from just time pricing to value pricing, the more I believe important brand is going to be.
Yeah. Just specifically about that, would it also the same logic be used to explain the kind of emergence of gig economy and what we've talked about just before this started? People actually don't want to work in office because fundamentally, job is a person selling their time for a price, which is a salary. I mean, we sell a third of our 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. But would that change that model that people are not going to work for time, but they're going to work for the value that they create for a company we paid?
I think so, because I mean, we had a really interesting situation, the system that Eric built for us when we were showing it to one of our teams, and they said, "This is absolutely fantastic. You know, what you just showed me would have taken me 4 days to do, and it would take the whole thing in 4 minutes. So, and I do this a number of times for my clients. My clients move to a time-based rate card bundle. So what do I put down on my timesheet? Do I put down 4 minutes? Or do I still put 4 hours? Because, anyway, so we had a long debate about that. I was trying to tell you what the outcome of that was. But yeah, now, I think the difficulty is in convincing people that you have created that, or that value is worth it to them. Yeah, because if I went to a client and said, we've automated the process, and it was wonderful, it cost us a lot less, and then it's like, well, if it's cost you a bit less, it should cost me a bit less. Not the other way around, which is we've created the process so that people who get the base information really quickly, and then they can spend a little bit more time rather than take a chance of presenting it, they take a little bit more time to think about it, to add a little bit more value to it, etc. But I think, yeah, I think it has a huge impact on the procurement industry, because frankly, the procurement industry is fixated with time. How long does it take to do simple tasks? Yeah, what's the daily? What's the rate of the various levels you have in the organisation? And from that, we will assess whether we think that your bid gives us more or less value than something else. Yeah, yeah. And I think the reason all these things are really interesting is we don't know the answers to this. We are enjoying the benefits of what ChatGPT and the various technologies and the really clever technology people have added to all of this. And I still find it literally phenomenal that pretty much every day there is something new that's being created off the back of these types of technologies. Yesterday was impossible to do or very complicated, and today it's suddenly available to everybody for $20 a month. So I think that's sort of interesting. I'm going to whiz through a couple of these things and we're almost out of time. I just want to use retail as an example, because I think you could be again forgiven into thinking that actually what's going to happen with AI is we're all going to be out of a job. So the future is unbelievably bleak, because they're going to be fewer and fewer people that have a reasonable amount of work and have good jobs, and all the other jobs. Certainly a lot of base white collar jobs are going to be transferred to AI, and to an extent that's sort of inevitable. But we've never really had it in the white collar industry. We've had it in industrial areas ever since the industrial revolution. And I suppose maybe people from now, us white collar people will sort of get a taste of the medicine for them over the course of the last few years. The thing that I've found really interesting in America, other people who've got a lot of experience in the retail sector, is that AI has the capacity to change all of those retail ratios that frankly have remained the same since probably as a child. Your percentage of sales to staff ratio, percentage of sales, etc., all remain the same, irrespective of a lot of technology developments. In fact, you could argue actually what it's done. But one of the things it's done is actually add huge amounts of cost to the business without necessarily delivering the value as well. But what we've done is we've worked sort of a roadmap about actually, rather than thinking how can you extract all the value, but actually where can you make the savings? In fact, I did work about moments. I will then be honest with you, certainly actually what is the it's honeycomb retail. If you go to honeycombretail.ai, you can just download the white paper that we released at for National Retail Federation conference last week, and this will all be explained to you. But rather than looking at where you can extract the cost, it's also about where can you reinvest that. And the smart thing to do is actually almost to go back to basics again, and to reinvest that into better customer service, better customer experience. So, you know, you can look at what's happening in AI in a couple of sort of, you know, it's either the glass is half empty or the glass is half full. And sorry, definitely from a retail perspective, I'm looking at it as this is a phenomenal opportunity to at last change the retail ratios and do with what us retailers have done really poorly over the last 15 years, because we've spent all of our time looking at how we can be more efficient in the supply chain, and how we can extract more margin out of that, and less about actually fundamentals of what, you know, we do, which is to understand better what is it the consumer wants. How can you create a differentiated proposition? How can you create really interesting ranges? How can you develop fantastic merchandise, which is so compelling. I had a retail client once who defined a customer to me. And he said, "Oh yeah, customer, David, guess it's customers are those people that come into my store, my money in their wallets." That was his sort of definition of what a customer. But you know what it's like. You go into some stores and they're boring, you know, engaged. You go to other stores and you know, all of a sudden you're handing over your credit card before you know it. It's phenomenally sort of engaging area. So I think we'll stop there. The thing that I find phenomenally exciting, and I think phenomenally exciting for you, is we're entering a very, very different environment than we have been. The opportunities are going to be immense. The risks are also going to be immense, and it's going to be much more now, which I think plays the strength that you're learning. You know, there'll be much more. The people who win, the people are going to be really, really good at strategy. And it's going to be a strategic. Those who play this game strategically well can win. Those who think actually it's all going to go away, it's a bit of a fad, it's not going to sort of impact me. Identifying life very tough. So I think summary for me would be, I suppose, huge knowledge. Thanks.
Let's start with a few questions. I've asked a few already, so please.
Don't be shy. Yeah.
So just say the AI will bring so many impacts to the retail industry, which I also I want to ask you, so what kind of strengths or how as a marketer we can be well prepared against the AI era? So because the retail industry may change, how they do the strategy analysis, customer behaviors, research will be more and more rely on the AI. So for our so for the marketers, how can we elevate our
That's good question. I would say on two strands. The first is speed, and the ability to really understand what's happening almost now in real time across lots of different touch points. I think is going to enable better, faster decision making. The second is that And again, you're partly going to a little bit, and actually I have to say, I partly have to. So I am told, in the good old days of advertising, we used to have a copywriter and an art director, and they used to sit in different offices. And the copywriter would write the copy and they put it out the door of the art director. And the art director would then go away and think of wonderful ways of doing it. Then they put somebody had a brilliant idea, putting these two people in the same office so they could work together. And I think that revolution was created. I see the same sort of what happening with AI. With what you'll have is you'll have a fantastic merchant who really understands merchandising. You will have a fantastic supply chain person, and then you have a fantastic chain of maintenance. And they'll work as a team. I think we put those three forces together, really understanding what's going on, being able to make the process, being able to implement that with the supply chain, being able to learn above it. And then the layer that goes on top of that from the market perspective is how do you take that data, understand the consumer better, and then be able to create more compelling consumer communication that are more and more real-time communication. And I think the other thing that's going to be very interesting is that together with other technologies that are sort of coming of age now and being cost effective is the ability to be able to create individual creative work just for you and just for you. So actually, it will look and feel that actually quite different. I'll be able to deliver that in a way that the content. Now, we're still a little bit away from the reality of that, but that's certainly the direction. Yeah, sorry.
Thank you, David, for a lot of insights. Really good. My name is Milos. I'm from Indian marketing, also in Europe. And my question will be like, I'm interested in using the agnostic model because, like me myself, I never use that kind of model. I just like differentiate brands with direct and indirect competitors. But I think that in terms of local competitors, it's more than indirect. And my question would be like, what kind of insight that people seems overlook when comparing brands in terms of which is associated as the local competitors?
I think it's as much a piece of mindset as anything else, which is we always like to put some weird, in my sense, the word cultural competitors when we're talking to our clients. A, because it's a good topic of conversation, which is why you put it in. The other is because the way we should do the study, because we can rank, from coda to coda, the usual stuff, brands that come down the bottom, and as a brand owner, and looking just at your category, you might be the second or the third or maybe the top within that category. Suddenly, when you look at it across culture, you get a little bit of a shock because actually you're number 372. But I'm number one in the Facebook marketplace, and I think that's a really good shot to the system to give to brand owners, which is people who now are very political about just the things that happen in their sector, risk huge amounts of disruption going on. And I sort of feel now, especially with the way in which AI is going to make a lot of new product development easier and quicker and all that sort of stuff. More and more people are going to be disrupted in their marketplace. So you either disrupt yourself or you're going to get disrupted. And I think laying that in the framework of brands and culture is a really nice model to be able to help people understand it. Yeah. Hi.
I'm Sana. I wanted to ask, like, your take on AI is that it's extremely disruptive and it is going to take down a lot of companies. So why are local brands like Trader Joe's or Primark, why do they still decide to not go online, and how are they still being profitable and generate billions of dollars?
Okay, well, that's a very interesting question, because, I spent a bit of time with the Primark CEO. I answered that question. I'll answer it a slightly different way, which is, how long can you resist? Going online? And he, in fairness, never gave me a very definitive answer. And he said, it is constantly reviewed. It's on our board. Every month, there is an item on our board. Yeah, which is something we, but at the moment, it's not like, it's not like, we think we can give them a significantly better experience and significantly better pricing if we do the majority of the transactions. Within the store.
So do you think these retail stores will be able to beat the online stores if they still follow?
I don't see at the moment necessarily the connection between being a great user of AI and having to be online. So I think, who was I talking to? I was talking to the chairman of the board of Crate and Barrel. I think it's about if I can find the I asked quite a few people on AI, and he was quite that already he believes he's extracting quite a lot of value in the organisation, not necessarily on from the economic perspective, but better understanding, better analytics of the data to be able to understand sizing, ordering, all that sort of stuff. So the business is so I think online retailers and offline retailers they both benefit from what they have to do. But you asked a very interesting question. It's a question that we asked. Say, how long can they resist this for? But the last mile delivery is phenomenally costly. So you can lose all of your margin on that last mile delivery. And also remedials are very expensive. And then you've got returns. Much more, it's much more efficient to get your customers to go to the store, go to the shelf, pick the item off the shelf, go to the checkout, self-checkout. I mean, that's ideal. Then the customer doing all the work.
I was watching one of their interviews, and the strategy they had is they decided to go partially online, wherein the consumer could pick out what they wanted, but they had to physically go to the store and collect it. So they were able to shop efficiently, but also when a person enters the store, they're more likely to buy more things. So they end up buying more than what they actually need. So that's
I think they're a very interesting point, because even after all these years, we still find it very difficult to get people to impulse purchase online. So much easier to get people to impulse purchase in the store, the layout of the store, what you put at the checkout, all that, signage, all that sort of stuff. Because there's a much more of a linear journey problem with reality where there's everybody is coming to it through it in a very different disjointed way. There's no sort of linear happening. And we don't like being interrupted in our digital journey by a pop-up saying, why don't we buy 3 of these, or have you thought about left-handed widgets? We find that really disruptive. I think that we're going to slightly do that.
Maybe one last question.
Anything online?
Let me just ask one last question. So for WPP specifically, how does your AI usage and your AI future look like? And for future marketers that might look for jobs in a company, in WPP or company like yours, What do they need to know?
Okay, so I would say this, you can't get enough of AI experience, statistics. I mean, I think I made a big mistake. I used to sit at the back of my mathematics class at school. I really should have sat on the front, but I can't turn that to. We are analysts, you know, mathematics, modelers, software engineers, UX, all that sort of areas is absolutely cool. So if you get the opportunity to go to the lecture and get experience in that sort of area. We have publicly said so. We haven't said we fundamentally believe that AI is going to play a really important part in the future of marketing. We want to be at the forefront of that. We are investing huge sums of money. We are creating open AI, WPP open, but all our operating companies with automated workflows that are fed with sort of forward sort of data and workflows, etc. And yeah, take a big bet that is going to be the route to us working more efficiently and being able to be more interested in solving things like that, let alone then the delivering technology of automated ads, automated translation, and doing the sort of things that we conceptually have wanted to do for ages, but the cost of doing the technology just wasn't there. So, I think for a really fantastic creative together with a fantastic technologist with data science and data together, and we're going to see a new sort of era in what creativity is about, which is exciting.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.